Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Maestro Online.
Hi, Robin. This is so exciting.
We love how excited you are, and it's amazing to have you here. So,
Thank you for having me.
you've had an amazing career, but how did music begin for you? Was it something around you at home, or was it just you, or how did it
I
start?
love this question. Okay, so the condensed version is that I always joke my parents were hippies, and all we had in the house was a wooden marble set and a piano. I remember one day my mom came in and I was watching television. I think I was two or three, and I was reciting some commercial, Calgon, take me away. And she just said, that's it. And I remember my whole world stopped. She pulled out the cord and she cut the cord to the television. And that was a huge memory in my mind. And it was also a big story in our family. Remember when mom cut the cord? And so after that, I just remember playing piano. I went to the piano, and fortunately my mom was really, really supportive. She took me to lessons and I just kept going with it. It was very natural for me to read music, and kept on going and going and going. And then when I was about 12 years old, I started to play things off the radio by ear. And my dad said, oh, I've noticed that you started slacking off on your classical practicing a little bit. Would you like to take some jazz lessons? And I said, what's jazz? And he said, I don't know, but maybe we can find out. And the next thing I knew, we were at a Dizzy Gillespie concert in Harvard Square in Cambridge,
Wow.
Massachusetts. And I was like, oh my goodness. And he found me a teacher who told me to go get the record Kind of Blue. And when I heard Bill Evans, I was like, oh my gosh, I must play like that. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I had this little tape recorder, and I put my little tape recorder up to the record player and recorded it, and then put it on my piano and started transcribing Bill Evans's solos. And then I would just start playing along with him, and it just sort of evolved from there. And I got
So,
really into jazz after that point.
so you got a grounding of technique from the classical, but then
Yes.
you obviously had a natural ear that sparked from there.
I believe I must have had a natural ear because the reading came pretty, pretty readily. But I know I did work at it because I had 10 years of solid classical lessons, and I worked very hard at that whole thing. And I think also the ear developed over time. You learn once you're introduced to things like intervals and chords, you do develop the ear. So I may have, once I became aware of these devices, I might have then started to train myself to hear them and to notice what they were. And people always ask, oh, do you have perfect pitch? And I said, you know what? I think perfect pitch is so overrated, but what I do encourage in people is relative pitch. So no matter what your do is, you can find a third, you can find a fifth, you can find a seventh. I don't care what your one is. It doesn't matter if you have the perfect pitch. I don't think that's so important. But the relative pitch, no matter what your one is, if you can find a major third, a major seventh, or any kind of dominant seventh, or any of the chord tones from whatever you decide your one is, then you're golden because you can go anywhere you want. And of course, jazz musicians always say to themselves, well, we got to practice in 12 keys because you never know what key a singer is going to sing in. And that has proved to be true. And
Yes.
people say, oh my gosh, how do you play in every key? Well, I'm like, well, there's 88 keys, but there's only 12 keys. So it's not infinite. It's doable. And I always have my students practice in the cycle of fourths, so that every exercise is done in 12 keys. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but it does acclimate people to putting their hands in those five-finger positions in every key. And I usually go up a fourth. So it's like C and then F, B flat, because jazz musicians tend to like the flat keys a lot more than the sharp keys, if you've ever noticed that.
Absolutely. So all these amazing things, fantastic. How did you go from copying Bill Evans, etc., to becoming a successful pro, winning competitions, becoming known more widely? What was your journey?
So sweet. Okay, so sweet of you to ask. Okay, so let me see how this all worked out. Okay. So basically, right after high school, I was already sort of playing in bands around town. I always joked that the median age of all the bands that I played in were 70-year-old men. And I was 14 years old playing in a band called the Hot Fudge. And I joke, Robin, because the median age of the bands that I still play in are generally 70-year-old men. All the big bands that I play in. It's cute. It's very cute. I mean, I joke, but that's kind of how it is. But anyway, so I was playing in these bands in Belmont, Massachusetts, and I was also playing in a little combo at the Laundry School of Music, which kind of got me playing with a bass player and a drummer. And so after I went to 1 year of normal college, I thought, I don't know if I'm good enough to be a musician. I went to Tufts University, but they had a 5-year program with the New England Conservatory. So after 1 year of Tufts, where I was very fortunate because George Garzone, who is a very well-known and wonderful saxophone player, he came over from NEC to Tufts to teach a ensemble. And he was very encouraging to me. And I thought, So after 1 year of Tufts University, where I was like, oh my gosh, they're making me do a science class. And all I remember is being in, I thought, oh, geology, that sounds easy. Let me pick that. And I remember him talking about platelets and algae. And I was thinking, all I want to do is play my Charlie Parker Omnibook solos. So after 1 year of Tufts, I said, I'm just going to music school. So I transferred all my credits over there. And once I got to New England Conservatory, I felt like I found my people. And it was just wonderful. I mean, there was so many wonderful musicians. It was George Russell, and there was Hankus Netsky, and there were some really fantastic people that were very, very high level and encouraging when I got there. And there were ensembles, and you got lots of practice playing with, rhythm sections. And there was also a gig board in the office. And I remember going there and I was like, why aren't people signing up for these gigs? So I signed up for as many gigs as I could. I just started gigging and gigging and gigging and gigging and gigging. And one thing, look, it did not come easy. There was one time that one of the people that I was really looking up to at the time, her name was Rachel Z. At the time, her name was Rachel Nicolazzo, and she's since become Rachel Z. And she's an incredible musician and composer. And I really looked up to her because there were so few women. And she asked me to sub for her at one of the local hotels. And after I played, she said, oh, well, the guy said you need to go home and work on your time a little bit more. And I was like, oh no. So I really took all of that criticism, and it made me work even harder. And it was funny because George Russell once said to me, there was a composition assignment. He goes, you're never going to make it in New York with a left hand like that. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I would get very embarrassed. And then I would go home and practice left hand bass lines in every key. Because anytime someone told me I wasn't quite there yet, it gave me motivation to work extra hard. And there was one time I was playing solo piano at the Bostonian Hotel in Boston because I was just grabbing all these gigs off the gig board because I just wanted to experience so much. And in the other room, there was another female piano player. I'm like, another female pianist. And we met in the hallway. And she was like, hi, I'm Diana Krall. They call me the female Harry Connick. And I was like, oh, hi, I'm Sarah. I didn't even know who she was. And then years later, I was like, I met Diana when she was just Diana Krall. And that was really interesting. And there were so many young people up and coming that later became names. And I met so many musicians. So after I graduated from New England Conservatory, all the people that I respected and admired in the jazz division were moving to New York City. And I thought, I want to move to New York City. And I put my Fender Rhodes in the trunk of my car, and I packed it up. And it took me a few months to get my courage up to go. But in the course of some conversations, I was on a gig with a bass player, and he said, oh, one of my roommates is moving out. I live on 101st and Broadway. I'm like, I'll take it. And I put a suitcase together, drove down to New York. Oh, I also remember applying for NEA grants, National Endowment for the Arts grants. And I remember getting one to study with Joanne Burkeen. See, there were very few females, but I was latching on to them, like, she could do it, she could do it, she could do it, I could do it. And there was also, so there was Joanne Burkeen, who I got the grant to study with, and there was also Marion McPartland, who had a show. And I was like, I want to be on her show. I want to be on her show. So I had these like little goals. So I went to study with Joanne Burkeen. I took one lesson a month. And I had this goal to get on Marion's show. I moved down to New York, and this is another thing. It's weird because I was always sort of the only female in a sea of men, but I was finding these little pockets of women. And then when I got to New York, someone said, oh, you should call Kit McClure. I was like, who's that? They're like, she runs an all-female band. And I went and I auditioned. She's like, you're in. It was a big band of all women. And it was amazing because they were doing gigs not only all over New York City, but they were doing gigs all over the world. We went to Japan 13 times. We went to Portugal and England and Paris. And here I was getting experience without even knowing it. Like, it was a blessing. I kind of got into the river of the jazz life and just let the current take me here and take me there. And then to continue your question, I had my own trio because I'd always been writing music. And one time I had a gig at, oh my gosh, please forgive me. Now that I'm almost years old, I can't pull names. It was a jazz club in the Village. It has since changed names a bunch of times. But I was down there and this gentleman came over and he said to me, I'd like to manage you. And I was like, well, I need a manager. And it was sort of surprising. But he said, I'm Steve. Nice to meet you. It turned out to be Steve Getz, who was the son of Stan. And I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just playing out of joy and doing all this stuff. And at that point, I really didn't really have, much of a idea. I was just kind of doing gigs and this and that. And he said, all right, we're going to take you into the studio. And he's like, I'm going to put you on with Billy Hart and Michael Brecker. We're going to get Michael Brecker on your record. I'm like, what? I mean, these things were happening, Robin. Like, it just was strange. Like, just my enthusiasm and love for what I was doing sort of drew these things towards me. You could almost, I don't want to say predestined or whatever. It's strange, but now that I'm getting older, I am listening to more spiritual podcasts, and they do say that things are sort of predetermined. I don't know. Anyway, I ended up going into the studio, and Steve Getz, the son of Stan, he was also working at an agency called the Abby Hoffer Agency. They submitted my recording to a company called Naxos Jazz, and then he wanted me to do another recording. So I had a 2-record deal with them, and at that time there was a competition. I was always very interested in competitions. Like, oh, there's competition, and you have to be under 30, and I was almost 30, so I was like, oh, I better do it. So I signed up for it. Basically, you had to send in a tape. There were like 100 tapes all over the world, and they picked 5 finalists, and I was one of them, and I was the only woman, as usual. So I thought, I'm going to go, and I'm going to be better than all these men. I mean, I was just joking, but I thought, wouldn't that be cool? So I flew down to Jacksonville, Florida, and the judges there were Benny Green, I hope I can remember this right, Ellis Marsalis, Horace Silver, Bill Charlap, and there was one other judge. Please forgive me, I can't think of who it was at the time. Was it Kenny Barron? Yes, it was Kenny Barron.
Yeah,
thank you. So. Yes. And so,
because this was the American Jazz Piano Competition, wasn't it?
The Great American Jazz Piano Competition. It was just kind of one of these things where some people that I had really admired, had won it and had been in it, and I thought, well, why not? Let me just go try it. So I also thought to myself, well, I had been in a couple other like lesser known competitions before, and I hadn't won them. And I thought, I wonder why the winners win. And I sort of studied some of the tapes of the winners of the previous years, and I saw that all the winners had picked standards, and some of the runners up were kind of trying to be fancy and do like esoteric monk tunes or maybe originals, and that's what I had done in the previous competitions, thinking I was being all hip and cool and like modern. But the winners always picked standards, so I thought, okay, for this one, because it's my last chance, I'm going to be 30. It's like an under 30 competition. Let me do 3 standards. I picked Body and Soul. I picked How Long Has This Been Going On by George Gershwin. And I picked It's All Right With Me. And I went and I did those songs. And when they announced the winner, I nearly like lost my socks. They were like, Sarah Cion. I was like, oh my gosh. And later on, they said, you know, after they kind of were analyzing everything, it wasn't that she was better than she wasn't technically better than the other finalists. She just had more passion. But I also knew it was also because I had done standards and I saw the other people playing monk and playing modern and doing their own compositions. And I thought, haha, that's what I used to do when I didn't win them. So I think it was also a matter of me really knowing that they're judges and they're judging you on a language. So you really got to kind of play in the language of which you can kind of, jazz isn't a competition, but it was a competition in this particular sense. So I think by picking those 3 well-known tunes that I had a little bit of an edge. So that was great because from then on, I used that winner of the Great American Piano Competition the rest of my life. It was very helpful, even though 9/11 came shortly thereafter.
Right.
And at that point, it was interesting because I was really just at the precipice of something. Like Steve Getz had arranged for me to play in Fukuoka, Japan for an entire month at the Blue Note. I mean, I was playing at that point some amazing gigs, some opportunities. I had gotten to a really pretty good level and people were enjoying it. And I thought, I'm just going to go with it. 9/11 happened and Steve, he wasn't doing too well. He got a divorce and he was falling out with the agency. And then at that point, Axos Jazz decided to fold their jazz division. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is the most meaningful thing that I can do at this point in my life? Because at that point, all of this momentum sort of, and all these jazz clubs were closing down. And I thought, well, I am 35 almost, so I think I'll have a baby. And my daughter was born, my daughter Laura. And there is an interesting story about this. I hope this isn't long-winded and boring.
It's fantastic, Sarah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's some interesting things that happened before I had my second child, but I had my daughter Laura, and okay, this is a little funny. I don't know if I can say this on camera, but I will. I said anyway. I was still wanting to do gigs, so I was nursing and rehearsing. I was like doing it all. I didn't want to quit, so I was like, literally, I was still doing boop, 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 boop. Like, I mean, I had a gig when she was 3 weeks old. I brought her, and I had friends hold her while I was playing. I just was like thinking, oh, just keep playing. So one of the cool things that happened shortly after Laura was born was that I got this random phone call, and this gentleman said, hello, Miss Cion. I was like, oh, hello. And he was like, I just want you to know, I don't, mean to insult you in any way, but I'm looking for a Bill Evans sounding piano player to play on a soap opera. I was like, a soap opera? That's not insulting. Which one? And he goes, All My Children. And I nearly choked. I was like, oh my gosh, I watched that soap opera. I was like, I'm your girl. And so he was like, well, I heard you on YouTube and you sounded like Bill Evans. I was like, oh my gosh. Not only is that such a compliment because he was my earliest and dearest influence. So I was so blown away. So I went into the studio and he wanted solo piano, and I called it Laura's Lullabies. It turned out to be a little sleepy. I sort of arranged it so that I did a key in every major key and every minor key. I kind of based it on the Bach Well-Tempered Clavier.
Okay.
And they liked it, but they said it was a little sleepy, which it was. So what I did was I made it into an album called Laura's Lullabies, which puts babies to sleep. But they still were playing it in the background of the Valley Inn, where Erica Kane was like breaking up with her husband, explaining why she was now going to marry his younger brother. I mean, it was such a thrill to be watching TV and hearing myself playing in the background. So they said, okay, we loved it, but can you do something a little bit more upbeat? So I went back into the studio and recorded a second album of all original material that ended up on All My Children's Valley Inn. And to this day, I'm still getting residuals from Egypt, because I think Egypt is about 15 years, 20 years behind, and they're still playing reruns of All My Children. And I'm still getting a few residuals from that, which is really funny and interesting, but All My Children has since gone off the air. But that was a remarkable opportunity, because at that point I was a mom and I wasn't really playing out much. So that was something I could do from home, compose and record. Yeah. Then I didn't want my daughter to be an only child. So I had my son. And at that point I was still clinging to a career. I was traveling with James McBride. Have you ever heard of The Color of Water? Became a national bestseller. And James McBride is a wonderful sax player, and he told his managers, he said, I don't want to go on any of those stuffy book tours unless I can bring my jazz band. And he said, and they said, okay. And I was in his band, and for some reason I asked my husband at the time, would you be okay if I went away on sort of weekend tours still with James? Would you stay with Laura? And he was like, do it. So I was going to airports. I was literally pumping milk in airport stalls. I mean, Robin, it was ridiculous. But I couldn't sort of like, my brain, I couldn't quite compute that I was slowing down, that my career was kind of, I always thought it was going to go up, but it was kind of going down. So when I got home from these things, I thought, I just don't want my daughter to be an only child. So I thought, well, I'm almost 40. I better have another one. At that point, oh my gosh, there was about, I guess, a solid 10 to 12 years where I didn't play much. I didn't take many gigs. And that's why I called myself a life sandwich. I had this flurry of activity, and then there was this whole thing where I was raising my children. I gave everything to my kids. I mean, like all my heart and soul that I had for my music put into my children. But what's interesting is that this is the empty nest year. My son just went off to his first year of college. My daughter graduated, and now I'm back to playing. And all of that life experience has now come back with the passion for the piano. So all of these songs and all this music that I created before I had the kids, now I'm pulling them out again, and now I'm playing them with a lot more life experience.
Fantastic.
So it's kind of this whole, I call it a life sandwich.
So now you're more musically mature, even
now I'm more musically mature. Yeah. So now I can do it again. And also because I have this passion for teaching, because I never stopped teaching, I am now writing a lot of materials for teaching.
Fantastic. And tell us also about how Warner Brothers became interested in Cat in the Hat for the Mule, or how Marvel wanted Golden Song for Golden Song for the Dark World in Thor.
Okay, so this is another sort of incredible kind of thing. So the same gentleman who had gotten me on all my children, he said, listen, do you mind if we put the material into the Riptide library? And I was like, sure. Like, I'm probably, as you just saw before we started recording, the least technical person you probably ever meet. So if someone offers to help me out with those kinds of like technical types of things, I'll create all day long, but you do the technical stuff. So he's like, oh, I'll take care of it. We'll do the licensing and this, and it's a 50-50 split. And I was like, whatever, I'm delighted. So he put all of the stuff that we did for All My Children, which by that time was about 60 songs, 60 original songs I had created for them, into 3 separate albums. And he put them into this library, and just very erroneously, like once in a blue moon, I would get an email that said, you have a placement. And one time it was for Thor Dark World, and another time it was for The Mule, which was Clint Eastwood. And then I think there were a couple times it ended up on, I don't know, some TV shows here and there. It wasn't a lot of money at the time, like maybe, like, I don't know, I want to talk about money, but the thing that came up recently was quite a surprise because I hadn't heard from Riptide in several years. You have a placement. It's always exciting. Oh my God, I have a placement. And it turned out to be the Meta people from Facebook. And they had like a goggles commercial where it was like virtual reality. And they needed some jazz and they picked my music. And I have the clip, but literally it's hilarious because it's 2 seconds you can hear me playing. And they sent me a check for $25,000. It was the most money I ever made in one fell swoop. They had paid $50,000 for 2 seconds of my music. And I thought, wow, I really missed the boat on this whole TV movie thing because I kind of let that whole thing happen to me passively. I thought if I had really taken an interest in that, that would have been a really good thing for me. But it just sort of happens when it happens. And the licensing company gets 50%. I thought, you know what? I'm going to buy myself a new used car. And that's what I treated myself to. But it was literally just kind of like, it's in a library. And what happens is people, they go listen and, oh, I need some jazz. And they'll listen. Oh, I like that. So it was kind of random how I got those placings. That's how that all kind of happened. Yes.
That's fantastic. I'd like to ask you one question before we go.
I love questions.
Okay. So, final question. If somebody was watching this going, I want to be like Sarah, and I love playing the piano, and I love hearing her life story, and I wish that could be for me, what advice would you give them?
Well, this is so interesting because, Robin, things have changed so much since we were kids. I mean, like, and also jazz was this tiny little thing that was happening. Like, it was this tiny speck of time that was sort of like, I can't even believe I lived during the same time period as a lot of these heroes of mine. We had Chick-corea just up until recently. Herbie Hancock is still walking the earth. I don't think, I can't remember the years, but if Bill Evans was alive when I can't even remember what year he died right now. But anyway, things have changed because of the internet and all of the different YouTube channels, and young kids and people from all over the world are starting to play and improvise at such a high level already. And it's sort of mind-blowing to me. It's like, if you want to hear it, and there's all these different ways of learning it, and there's all these different ways of doing it and getting access to it. So I think the way that I did it was a lot different from how they can do it now. But I think that number one, listening and having a passion for it is number one. Getting a private teacher, I think, is really key. You know, working one-on-one with somebody that can mentor you. But all of this sort of stuff, like who's that young kid who I just love, Jacob Collier, like listen to him on YouTube. It's just mind-blowing. He plays like 5 instruments equally well, and they're like at the highest level. And it's just, I think the level of musicianship at such a young age, and the improvisation and the jazz, it's so mind-blowing that I can't even relate to how a kid might sort of develop now. But I would say find records that you love and find an improvisation teacher. And also, of course, you know, you need to have a good technical facility to begin. And that's another little thing I forgot to tell at the beginning of the story, was that when my dad went to find me a piano teacher for jazz, the piano teacher said, "Oh, I can't take her. She's only 13 and it just takes too much technical facility to play jazz, so she's going to have to come back when she's 18. He said, "I only have one exception, but he's a genius." And it turned out to be Larry Goldings. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he now plays with James Taylor and just Maceo Parker, just one of the best jazz pianists alive today. And my dad said, "Oh, well, we completely respect you, but would you maybe just give my daughter an audition?" And he said, "Oh, fine." He was like humoring us. And honestly, I can't remember too much about that audition, except I think I played some Bach prelude at breakneck speed or something like that. And I became his second exception, lucky for me. And being next to Larry Goldings, we would have partner lessons, and then Larry's family said, "Oh, well, Larry goes to this camp called Encore Coda." Oh, that's another thing I would suggest to kids, finding a summer program for music. Because I went to these summer programs for music, called one in Sweden, Maine. People would always say, "Where did you go this summer?" I would say, "Sweden." And they'd be like, "Oh, what?" And then I'd say, "Sweden, Maine." And then they'd laugh. And another thing that I did when I got a little older was went to this really wonderful music program called Banff in Canada. And a lot of the younger people interested in jazz would gravitate there. But I'm sure there are so many summer programs right now sprouting up everywhere for jazz. And so I would say a summer program, a private teacher, getting into a jazz combo, or finding some kind of a situation where you can play with other people in a jazz band or a small combo. Just doing it and listening and just jumping in are some of the things that I would suggest.
Sarah, thank you so much for spending the time to chat to us
today. Thank you for your lovely questions. I want to know all about you.
You can interview me soon.
Okay, deal.